Welcome everyone to my ranking of Outkast Discography from worst to best. If you don't know who Outkast is, let me give you a little brief history lesson. Outkast is a hip-hop duo that originates from Atlanta, Georgia in 1992. The duo consists of Big Boi and Andre 3000. This rap duo is known and responsible for making southern rap music even relevant in the first place. The duo went on to make 6 studio albums, and they are considered today one of the best hip-hop groups of all time. Alright, now let's rank these albums. Actually, I do want to say one more thing before we start ranking their albums. For their double albums, Speaker Box and The Love Below, I will be ranking both of these albums separately because I just don't think it's fair enough to rank them together. Also, this is just Outkast albums, so no solo material from both group members, no Dungeon Family, no Goody Mob, it's just gonna be Outkast. Alright, let's actually begin. Coming in at number 7, it's The Love Below. This album is Andre 3000's attempt at a pop/R&B album. This album contains 2 smash hit singles, Hey Ya and Roses. However, if I'm gonna be honest, even with those 2 great songs, this album is kinda bad. Now don't get me wrong, this album is way better than any album you'd be getting from some auto-crooner like Nav, but it pales in comparison to the rest of the duo's discography. First of all, why is this album so long? Like, almost every single song on this album is almost 5 minutes or more than 5 minutes. I also feel like Andre's singing is just not that great. Like, his singing sounded perfectly fine on Stankonia, but I think the reason I liked it on Stankonia so much is because it was complemented by Big Boi's rapping. However, in The Love Below, Big Boi isn't there to help complement Andre's singing. Andre is completely on his own on this album. And what the hell, Andre? Why would you just leave us hanging like that on the last song? That's so inconsiderate. Also, I know I said earlier that Hey Ya and Roses were the smash hits from this album, but I'm gonna be honest, I don't think most people have even heard Roses before. I know I didn't before listening to this album. I think most people just know Hey Ya. They probably don't even know what album it's from. Alright, I'm gonna try to stop hating on this album so much because there are some good songs in here, like Love Hater, Happy Valentine's Day, obviously Hey Ya and Roses, and Dracula's Wedding. I just wish Andre decided to improve on some of the concepts that he presented in this album. I feel like if he did that, he would have been able to make a really good R&B album, but instead he decided to not drop another solo album for another 20 years. So it looks like we're never getting The Love Below Part 2. How unfortunate. But for these reasons, that's why it's at number 7. At number 6, we got Outkast's last album, Idlewild. Idlewild is actually the soundtrack for the movie Idlewild, and Andre 3000 and Big Boi actually star in this movie. And in my opinion, even though this album is definitely better than The Love Below, it's not by much. Andre and Big Boi's collaborative chemistry is definitely still there on this album, but it's just not at the level it was on their other albums. Also, while this album wasn't intended to be Outkast's last album, it definitely feels like that. On this album, Big Boi is doing his usual rapping, and Andre 3000 is almost exclusively singing. And that's okay because they did it on Stankonia and it sounded fine, it's just that Andre 3000 was still rapping on that album. This album also suffers from some of the problems from The Love Below. It's extremely bloated at an hour and 18 minutes. It's also got 25 tracks. I feel like there's a lot of unnecessary songs in the track listing, and to top it off, like 3/4 of the songs in this album weren't even used in the movie. And if you hadn't already noticed from listening to Stankonia and Speaker Box and The Love Below, Andre and Big Boi had pretty much drifted apart creatively, which is okay. People's interests change over time and there's nothing wrong with that. Now, even though all of this was happening, Idlewild is still a decent album. There are lots of great tracks on this album, such as Mighty-O, Morris Brown, NTU, Hollywood Divorce, and a really underrated one in my opinion, Make No Sense at All. The piano beat and Andre's melodic rapping goes insane. Moving on to number 5, we've got Speaker Box. Now you might be asking me, if The Love Below and Speaker Box are ranked so closely together, why not just combine them into one ranking? And the reason they're not combined is because the difference in the ranking is not this. It's more like this. This is pretty much why I felt the need to rank them separately. I just think that Speakerbox and all the other albums above this are so much better than The Love Below and Idlewild. First off, I feel like people don't talk about this album as much. Of course, a lot of people know about the song The Way You Move, but there's so many underrated bangers on this album, such as Ghetto Music, Unhappy, Tomb of the Doom, and Last Call. In my opinion, this album sounds just like any other Outkast album they had released previously before this album. We also got some awesome features on this album like Ludacris, Jay-Z, Lil Jon, and the East Side Boys. However, the reason I've ranked this album so low on the list is because I just don't feel like this album is complete without Andre 3000. I know I said before that this album sounds just like a regular Outkast album, but it just feels like it's missing something, and the thing that it's missing is Andre 3000. Whether it be his lyrical miracle verses or his awesome hooks, this album is just not complete without Andre. And no, Sleepy Brown is not a good substitute for him, as great of a singer as he is. Next up, we got Outkast's third album, Aquemini. I love the title of this album, it's so fun to say. I know so many people are going to be upset with me for putting Aquemini at 4. But please just listen to what I have to say. As I said before, this is Outkast's third album. This is also my favorite album cover out of all of Outkast's albums. I mean, you can't deny this is the most grand looking album cover ever. By a lot of people, this album is considered as the best southern hip hop album of all time, and it's contender for one of the best rap albums ever. And I can definitely see why people would think that. When I had first listened to this album, I actually really did not like it. Before listening to this album, the only other Outkast album I had listened to before this was Stankonia, and I was probably expecting Aquemini to sound like Stankonia. Another reason why I probably didn't like it was because I had A Great Chaos by Ken Carson on repeat for like a week. And A Great Chaos and Aquemini are on completely different artistic levels, even though they're both rap music. I'm pretty sure I was also sick during the first time I was listening to this album, so that probably also contributed to my hate for this album. But after listening to it a few more times, it has really grown on me a lot. And I like the album now, so everything's all good. This album fuses elements of country, rock, R&B, funk, and more. Not only that, but it also maintains this super spacey vibe to it. If I have to say one track on this album that's an essential listen, it's definitely the title track. I mean, just listen to the song and tell me that you don't start floating immediately. I can definitely tell why stoners rep this album so hard. Also, I think this album has the best intro out of all of Outkast's albums. The duo's ability to storytell on this album is also so incredible. It's so detailed to the point where you can just feel it. And as much as I love this album, here's why it's at number 4. Okay, I just want to say that I think that every track starting from the intro all the way up to The Art of Storytelling Part 2 is absolutely flawless. Every instrumental, verse, and chorus is filled with so much passion. However, I feel like after The Art of Storytelling Part 2, things kind of start getting a little spotty for me. Mamacita, in my opinion, is definitely the worst track on this album. It's not a bad track or anything, I just don't think it lives up to as well as all the other tracks on this album. And I know people are about to blast me in the comments for this, but after Sleepy Brown's verse on Spody Odie Dopalicious, I'm low-key checked out of that song. However, I do think Y'all Scared and Liberation are so good. Especially Liberation. I love CeeLo Green's vocals on this song. This is also the first album in the ranking to have spoken word from Big Rube. I think Big Rube's spoken word here actually adds so much to this song. I also love the instrumental on this song too. However, I do feel like the last song, Chunky Fire, is kind of long. I mean, Andre's last chorus is done before the song is even halfway done. The last 3 minutes of the song is just a skit. And actually, that's a problem that I have with a lot of the songs on this album. The songs are so good, but then they have this really long skit or interlude added to the end of the song. Now, there's nothing wrong with the actual skits. In fact, I think the skits add a lot to the album, in terms of storytelling. However, I just wish that they put the skits on different tracks, instead of just stitching them to the end of a track. But yeah, that kind of wraps up my complaints for this album. If you do think this album is Outkast's best, or even if you think this is the greatest hip-hop album of all time, you are completely valid for thinking that. I am just way too nitpicky, and I think that there are better albums in Outkast Discography. At number 3, we got Stankonia. Now, if you had asked me what was my favorite Outkast album back in mid-December when I was studying for my finals, I would have said Stankonia with no hesitation. However, after evaluating the rest of Outkast's albums, I decided to move this one down in the rankings a little bit. To start, this has to be Outkast's most pop and commercially accessible album they've ever made. I mean, you have definitely heard at least one song from this album, even if you've never even heard of Outkast before. Of course, I'm talking about So Fresh, So Clean, and Miss Jackson. You have definitely heard either one of those songs before. Even though this album's got a very big pop vibe to it, there are so many songs on this album that are super experimental and weird, such as Snappin' and Trappin', I'll Call Before I Come, and Question Mark. Even with these super experimental tracks, Outkast still maintains a very funky vibe for like almost every single song on this album. Now, while Big Boi is still rapping like he normally does on Stankonia, this is the album where Andre 3000 really starts going into his singing bag. He is definitely singing a lot more than he does rapping on this album, but whenever he does rap, it sounds so incredible. Of course, I'm talking about Andre's verses on Bombs Over Baghdad and Humble Mumble. His verses on these songs are filled with so much passion and energy, and when Andre sings, Big Boi is there to complement it, which is something we didn't get on The Love Below. Also, in my opinion, Andre's singing just sounds better on this album. Now, there are a few songs that I just don't mess with as much as the rest of the tracks. For example, one song that just never clicked with me is Explosion featuring Be Real. I don't know why, I just never really liked this song. Also, Gangsta has got to have one of the most regular beats I've ever heard on an Outkast album. But even these songs are really good, even though I don't really like them. Also, I've heard people call this album Outkast's most explosive album. And maybe you could say that if you're comparing it to the rest of their albums, but in reality, the only actual explosive songs on this album are Gasoline Dreams and Bombs Over Baghdad. I mean, maybe you could include Question Mark and Humble Mumble, but doing that is kind of a stretch. This album did do one thing that Aquemini didn't do, which was putting the skits on separate tracks, so I do really like that. If I had to recommend some essential tracks from this album that you should definitely listen to, I would say listen to Gasoline Dreams, Bombs Over Baghdad, and the title track. The title track for Stankonia is actually the same deal for the title track on Aquemini. When you listen to it, you will be literally floating. And actually, that's a general theme with all of Outkast's title tracks. Every title track is just so good. The only album that this doesn't apply for is Speakerbox and The Love Below, because neither of those albums had a title track. Well, actually, The Love Below does have a title track, but it's the intro, so it's not really a song. But yeah, listen to those 3 tracks. I would also tell you to listen to Miss Jackson, but most of you have probably heard it by now, so you don't need to listen to it again. Or listen to it again if you want to. I don't care what you do with your life. In second place, we got Outkast's debut album, Southern Playlistic Cadillac Music. Sometimes I feel like this album doesn't get the recognition it deserves. This album literally made Southern rap relevant. If it wasn't for this album, so many Southern rap artists after 1994 probably would not even bother making music, or their rap careers would end very early. A lot of people say that this album doesn't have any original beats on it. They say this because the beats have a very G-funk and boom-bap heavy influence on pretty much all the songs. Now, this does make sense in my opinion. As a debut album, their production team Organized Noise definitely was taking a lot of influence from albums like Dr. Dre's The Chronic and Wu-Tang Clan's 36 Chambers, since those were what were popular at the time. And I definitely agree that you could slip one of these songs into a very G-funk heavy album such as Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style, Tupac's All Eyes on Me, or like I mentioned before, Dr. Dre's The Chronic. However, you're really more here for the spitting game that Big Boi and Andre 3000 bring to the table more than the beats. But even though the beats are kind of unoriginal and some of the beats do kind of sound the same from track to track, you can't deny how hard this album goes, especially with the duo's pen game on top. I mean, in my opinion, every single song is a banger on this album. When I'm listening to this album, I feel like I'm watching a video of me going on a walk, but it's in a time lapse and it's also in third person view. And I've actually listened to this album while I was going on a walk one time, and it is such a vibe. In fact, it was such a good vibe that I actually recommend you do it. But besides the beats kind of sounding the same, this album is definitely an essential listen for any hip hop head. And while I think you should listen to every single track on this album, if I had to pick a few tracks you should listen to, I would say listen to My Intro to Let You Know, Ain't No Thing, the title track, of course, and Get Up, Get Out. Finally, at number 1, we've got ATLiens. This album is so incredible. Like, from front to back, this is by far one of the best album experiences I've ever had. Not only that, but this is also Outkast's shortest album ever, coming in at just under 55 minutes. There is no filler in this album at all, which makes the album experience just that much better. Remember earlier in the video when I was talking about Aqueminize beats and how spacey they were? Well, ATLiens basically takes that spaciness to another level. I mean, these beats literally sound like they're from another world. Case in point, the song Elevators. The beat is super stripped back and it's very, very soft, but it's so eerie and so entrancing. And that's actually the case for a lot of the beats on this album. A lot of the beats on this album are very quiet. But I see why Outkast did this, as this album's appeal isn't really for the beats as it's for the lyrics. Don't get me wrong, the beats are so good, but the lyrical content really adds a lot to these songs. Now, there are songs on this album that aren't as quiet as Elevators, but they still maintain a really chill vibe, such as the title track, Wheels of Steel, and Mainstream. Also, out of all of Outkast's albums that have a spoken word from Big Rube, the spoken word that we get on ATLiens is probably my favorite out of them all. After Big Rube's spoken word, it transitions so well into Andre and Big Boy's rapping. Every single song on this album has something unique about it that makes it special. I even think Extraterrestrial is a good song too. Now, I don't have this song added to my playlist, but whenever I'm listening to the whole album, I will listen to this song. I feel like it adds so much to the spacey vibe of this album. And finally, if I had to recommend songs from this album, I would just listen to the entire thing. In my opinion, every single song on this album is essential. So there you go, guys. That's my ranking of Outkast Discography. Some of you might not be too happy with how I rank these albums. Most people would have probably put Southern Playalistic Cadillac Music much lower, and they probably would have put the double album a little bit higher. And to that, I have to say, it literally doesn't matter how I rank these albums, because my ranking for these albums will literally change by like next week, mainly the first 4 albums. I honestly believe the albums that I rank starting from number 4 and above are 10 out of 10 albums, and it literally won't matter where you rank them because you'll probably have a different opinion about the albums in like a month, or if you're like me, in probably a week. Right now I have ATLiens at number 1, but who knows, maybe next week Stankonia will be at number 1 for me, or maybe it'll be Aquemini. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and comment down below if you think I should do more videos like this in the future. And yeah, I'll see you all in my next video. And done. Finally, I'm done with this dumb video. God, this is gonna take me forever to edit. I guess I'll get started now. Freaking finally, I'm done editing this video. Now it's time to upload it. Wait a minute. Something doesn't feel right. Most of the videos I make are on Minecraft, and the things I usually talk about are drag clicking, but in this video I have zombies gameplay, and I'm talking about music? Something's not right here. Wait a minute, what's the date today?